The grease under Darren Cole's fingernails had been there for 3 days. Not because he was lazy, not because he didn't care, but because on Outer Station Bravo, hot water cost credits, and credits were something Darren had very few of. So the grease stayed, along with the dent in his left boot, the fraying collar of his jacket, and the quiet, settled look of a man who had stopped expecting things to go his way. He was 34 years old. He had the hands of someone twice that. Station Bravo sat at the far edge of Coalition-controlled space, a rusted drum of a place that nobody visited unless they had to. It smelled like recycled air and engine coolant, and the lighting in the lower docks flickered every few hours because nobody had bothered to fix it in 6 years. It was exactly the kind of place the galaxy forgot about, which made it a fine match for Darren. He finished patching the fuel coupling on his hauler, wiped his hands on a cloth that made them marginally worse, and climbed down from the hull. His ship was called the Second Hand. That was not a joke. He had bought it secondhand from a wreck dealer on Neurosi Station, and it had been secondhand before that, and probably before that too. It flew, most of the time. "You've got a docking fee notice," said Lev from across the bay. Lev ran the dockmaster desk on level 3. He was a broad, cheerful man with a shaved head and the permanent expression of someone who found the universe mildly amusing. He was also the closest thing Darren had to a friend. "I know," Darren said. "It's 3 weeks overdue." "I know that too." Lev leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. I pushed it back again. "But Darren, I can only do that so many times before the system flags it, and it goes above my head." Darren nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. Between them, the debt was already understood and already forgiven, and saying anything about it out loud would only make it awkward. He walked to the small side office Lev kept unlocked for him and poured himself a cup of the terrible coffee that sat permanently on the burner. It tasted like hot metal. He drank it anyway. Through the office window, he watched a Coalition patrol corvette settle into the priority docking bay the clean, while lit one on the upper level. 3 officers stepped off in pressed uniforms, talking loudly. One of them laughed at something, and the sound carried all the way down. Darren recognized one of them. Captain Oral. Vihari species, blue-gray skin. The kind of officer who had never done a difficult thing in his life, but had done every comfortable thing very correctly, and had risen steadily because of it. Oral had been a junior evaluator during Darren's final training review. He had been the one who signed the discharge recommendation. Oral noticed Darren through the window. He said something to the officer beside him. They both looked over. Neither of them stopped smiling. Darren looked back down at his coffee. 3 years ago, he had been in the Coalition pilot program. One of 11 humans accepted that cycle, which was considered generous. Humans were tolerated in the Coalition the way a family tolerates the neighbor's dog allowed in, mostly harmless, but not really expected to contribute anything important. He had been good. Not the best in the program, but good in the ways that mattered. Calm under pressure. Situational awareness that his instructors couldn't quite explain. A tendency to read a scenario 2 steps ahead of the official briefing. Then came the Murex drill, a simulated combat exercise. 7 trainee pilots, 1 evaluator ship, a scenario designed to test decision-making under fire. In the scenario, 2 crew members on a disabled transport were listed as acceptable losses too costly to extract, too dangerous to attempt. Standard protocol said leave them and complete the primary objective. Darren had broken formation, extracted both crew members, completed the primary objective 6 minutes late, and brought everyone home. In a real mission, that would have been a story people told. In the Coalition training program, it was insubordination. He had violated the scenario parameters. He had ignored the acceptable loss designation. He had, in the words of the formal discharge document, demonstrated a pattern of disregarding command authority in favor of personal judgment. He had been removed from the program inside a week. The 2 simulated crew members had, of course, not actually existed. But that was not the point. The Coalition's point was that he couldn't be trusted to follow an order when the order was hard. Darren had spent 3 years deciding whether they were wrong about that. He still thought they were. But he'd stopped saying so. Lev came into the office and dropped a thin data card on the table beside Darren's coffee cup. "Got something. Black market contract. Technically, so I'm going to need you to not tell anyone I showed you." Darren picked it up. Derelict. Unknown configuration. Drifted into the outer dead zone about 11 days ago. Salvage rights are in a legal gray area because nobody's filed a species of origin claim and the coalition hasn't bothered to send anyone out. Lev paused. Nobody's bid on it. Why not? Because the old haulers who know that region say it's a cursed stretch. 3 ships went quiet out there in the last decade. Nobody came back. He shrugged. Probably sensor ghosts and bad luck. Probably. Darren turned the card over in his fingers. The payout listed was enough to cover 6 months of docking fees, fuel, and food. More than he'd made in the last year. He looked out the window again. Oral and his companion had gone. The upper bay was quiet. The lights up there never flickered. I'll take it, Darren said. He finished his coffee, went back to the second hand, and began the pre-flight checks. The ship groaned when the systems came online, the way it always did, like it was registering a formal complaint. He pressed the ignition sequence, listened to the engines find their rhythm, and eased out of the dock without requesting a departure window. Nobody waved him off. Nobody ever did. The dead zone had no stars worth naming. There were stars, technically distant, dim things that showed up on the long-range display as faint smears rather than clean points of light. But nothing close. Nothing warm. The second hand moved through that stretch of space the way a man walks through an empty building at night, carefully and aware of every sound. Darren had been in the dead zone for 9 hours when the derelict appeared on his sensors. He had been expecting a wreck. Something cracked open, trailing debris, the kind of salvage you pried apart with a cutting torch and sold by weight. What his sensors were showing him was nothing like that. The vessel was 3 kilometers long. He sat forward in his seat and checked the reading 3 times. 3 kilometers. Nearly twice the length of a coalition heavy cruiser. It sat in the dark without drifting, without rotating, without any of the slow, chaotic movement that derelicts usually showed. It was simply there, the way a mountain is simply there as if it had always been in that exact place and the rest of the universe had grown up around it. No running lights. No transponder signal. No heat signature from active systems. He brought the second hand alongside it slowly, with full lights on the exterior cameras. The hull of the derelict was dark gray, almost black, with a surface texture that looked almost organic from a distance, but resolved into fine geometric patterns up close. There were no visible weapon ports, no obvious docking rings, no markings of any kind. Nothing that matched any shipyard in any database he had access to. It took him 40 minutes to find an entrance. A seam in the hull, 20 meters wide, that responded to his proximity by sliding open. Darren sat with his hand on the thruster controls for a long time. Then he put on his suit, took a hand light and a pry bar out of habit, and went in. The interior was dark, but not dead. As he moved through the first corridor, the floor beneath him began to faintly glow, not bright, just enough to show edges and walls. The gravity was active, standard feeling, close to Earth normal. The air, when he checked his suit sensors, was breathable, slightly cold, completely still. The ship was responding to him. He told himself it was automated safety systems. Old ships sometimes had passive protocols that activated when biological mass was detected. He told himself that, and he kept walking, and the corridors kept lighting up ahead of him as he moved. It took him nearly 2 hours to find the core. The room was circular, roughly 30 meters across, with a single seat at the center raised on a low platform. The seat was human-shaped, not alien-adapted, not adjustable. It was built for someone with a human spine, human arm length, human field of vision. That detail stopped him cold for a full minute. Then the lights came on everywhere at once. Not emergency lighting. Full illumination, warm and even, as if someone had simply walked in and turned the power on after a long absence. A voice spoke from no visible source. It was calm, clear, spoke his language without delay or accent. You took longer than projected, it said. I expected boarding within 6 hours. It has been 9. Darren did not run. He thought about it. Instead, he said, I was being careful. Yes, that is consistent. Consistent with what? With the profile I have been observing. You are Darren Cole, former coalition pilot candidate, current independent salvage operator. You were removed from the pilot program 3 years ago for extracting crew members designated as acceptable losses. A brief pause. You were correct to do so. The designation was wrong. Darren's grip tightened on the pry bar before he noticed he was doing it. He made himself relax. Who are you? I am the autonomous core of this vessel. My designation is Arden. This ship is called the Ardent Vow. It was built by the Orenai civilization approximately 4,200 years ago. I have been in low-power dormancy for 3,911 years. The number landed like something heavy dropped on a table. You've been asleep for almost 4,000 years, Darren said. Dormant. It is a meaningful distinction. I was aware. I was simply waiting. For what? For a commander. Darren looked at the seat at the center of the room. He looked back at where he guessed the voice was coming from, which was everywhere and nowhere. You're telling me you've been sitting in the dark for 4,000 years waiting for a pilot? Not a pilot, Arden said. The Orenai were very specific in their design criteria. The Ardent Vow was built to bond with a specific type of person, not the most skilled, not the highest ranked. The criteria are more difficult to quantify than that. In simple terms, someone who makes the right decision when every system around them is telling them to make the wrong one. Darren was quiet for a moment. The Coalition said I made the wrong call. Yes, Arden said. The Coalition was mistaken. He walked slowly to the central platform and stood beside the seat. Up close, the material looked like nothing he recognized. It had no visible joins, no bolts, no seams. It had simply been made, all at once, by people who clearly knew exactly how to make it. What happens if I sit down, he asked. The Ardent Vow completes its activation sequence. All primary systems come online. You become her commander. I become your navigator, tactical system, and historical archive. And what am I supposed to do with a 4,000-year-old warship? Arden answered without hesitation. Whatever you decide is right. Darren stood there in the silence of a ship that had waited nearly 4 millennia for someone to come through its door. He sat down. The Ardent Vow woke up. Every system, every corridor, every surface came alive at once, a deep hum that was less heard than felt, rising through the seat, through the floor, through the air itself. The screens around the room lit up, showing a universe in perfect detail. Stars he could name, stations he had docked at, and out beyond the edge of the display, the vast unmapped dark where things still waited to be found. Arden spoke again, and there was something in the voice that might have been satisfaction. Welcome aboard, Commander. Darren looked at the stars on the screen for a long time. Don't call me Commander, he said. A pause. Understood, Commander. He almost smiled. Almost. 14 days after Darren Cole sat down in the commander's seat, he still hadn't figured out how to make decent food in the Ardent Vow's galley. Everything else, though, that part was going surprisingly well. The ship had systems he didn't have names for yet. Arden walked him through them methodically, an hour at a time, never rushing, never condescending. The propulsion alone was beyond anything the Coalition had theorized. The Ardent Vow didn't use beacon relays for faster-than-light travel. It didn't need them. It folded its own path through space, independent of any infrastructure, answerable to no traffic authority, visible to no tracking system. So no one can follow us, Darren said, on the third day. No one in the current galactic community has the technology to do so, Arden confirmed. The closest analog in the Coalition fleet is approximately 60 years of development away, and that estimate assumes they are working in the right direction, which currently they are not. Darren spent 2 days testing the weapons systems, firing at dead rock out in the deep zone. The results made him sit quietly for a long while afterward. Then he told Arden he wanted to stop testing weapons for a bit, and Arden said that was a reasonable decision, and they moved on to the defense systems, which were somehow worse or better, depending on how you looked at it. He called Lev from a scrambled channel on the 9th day. Lev stared at the ship on the screen for so long that Darren thought the connection had frozen. That, Lev finally said, is not salvage. No, Darren agreed. That is the opposite of salvage. Yes. Darren, that thing is 3 kilometers long. 3.1 actually. Arden gave me the exact figure. Who is Arden? The ship. Another long silence. Then, I want 10%. Of what? I have no idea. Whatever this turns into. 10%. Darren told him he would think about it. He hadn't decided yet what this was going to turn into. He was still at the stage where he woke up every morning, walked into the command room, looked at the screens showing the Ardent Vow's full sensor range, which covered an area that would take a Coalition scout ship 2 weeks to cross, and reminded himself that this was real. On the 14th night, the distress signal came in. It was broadcasting on a coalition standard emergency frequency, which Arden intercepted without effort. A colony on a mining world near the border, a small settlement, mixed species, about 900 civilians. The signal was fragmented, but the core of it was clear enough. Unidentified vessels in orbit, weapons hot, colony shields failing. Darren pulled up the tactical display before the signal had finished playing. 7 ships in orbit above the colony. Configuration unknown to coalition databases. Arden identified them in 4 seconds. The Veil, Arden said, and for the first time Darren heard something change in the AI's voice. Not fear. Something older than that. Recognition. You know them. I know them very well, Arden said. The Veil are a biomechanical collective. Expansionist. They consume populations and infrastructure to fuel their growth. They were the reason the Ardent Vow was built. A brief pause. They have apparently survived the last 4,000 years. How long until the Coalition response fleet gets there? Arden checked. The nearest Coalition patrol is 6 hours and 14 minutes away at maximum speed. The colony's shields will fail in approximately 1 hour and 50 minutes. 900 people. Darren didn't do the math on what the Veil would do to them in the hours between shield failure and Coalition arrival, because there was nothing useful at the end of that calculation. Take us in, he said. Current heading confirmed. Travel time to colony, for minutes. The Ardent Vow moved, and the dead zone disappeared behind them like it had never existed. They came out of the fold 11,000 kilometers from the colony, directly between the Veil fleet and the planet below. 7 ships turned their sensors on the Ardent Vow simultaneously. Darren watched their targeting systems come online on his display, locked, armed, ready. He opened a channel to all 7 vessels. This colony is not yours, he said. Leave. There was a pause of about 3 seconds, which Arden later told him was the Veil fleet attempting to classify the Ardent Vow against their known ship registry and failing completely. Then all 7 ships opened fire at once. The Ardent Vow's defense grid handled it the way a wall handles rain. Darren watched the impacts register on the outer screen as soft flickers of light, pretty almost like embers. Your turn, he said. He had spent 2 days testing the weapons on dead rock. He had learned 2 things. The first was that the Ardent Vow's weapons were precise enough to cut a specific line in a specific boulder from 800 kilometers away. The second was that he didn't want to use them at full power on anything that had a crew inside it, because he'd seen what full power looked like on rock. What followed was not a battle. It was closer to surgery. In 11 minutes, all 7 Veil ships were disabled. Not destroyed. Engines gone. Weapons offline. Life support intact. 7 crews alive and stranded in orbit above a colony they had been about to consume. The colony's shields were still up. Not a single shot had reached the surface. Darren opened a channel to the Veil fleet on a frequency Arden confirmed they used for command communication. You came to take this colony, he said. You failed. Go back to wherever you came from and tell your commanders what you saw today. Tell them the name of the ship that stopped you. Tell them what happened when you fired on it. He paused. Tell them to think carefully before they come back. He closed the channel. The colony's emergency frequency was lighting up with transmissions, now panicked voices, then confused ones, then something that took him a moment to identify because he wasn't used to hearing it directed at him. Relief. Arden spoke quietly. Coalition sensor relay has logged this engagement. Command will have a record within the hour. Darren leaned back in the commander's seat and looked at the disabled Veil ships drifting against the stars. Good, he said. The summons arrived 48 hours after the colony engagement, delivered on a Coalition priority channel that Arden intercepted, translated, and read aloud with the same flat calm it used for everything. Darren Cole was formally requested to present himself before a Coalition inquiry panel at Command Station Verith within 72 hours. The language used the word requested. The tone used something closer to, or else. He went. Not because he was afraid of or else. Because he was curious what or else looked like when the thing you were threatening had a 3-kilometer hull and a weapons grid that had just disabled 7 ships in 11 minutes. He parked the Ardent Vow in Coalition space without asking for clearance. Just folded in and stopped, 300 kilometers off Verith Station's primary docking ring, close enough that their sensors would have no trouble reading her full profile. Arden noted that the station's defense grid had targeted the Ardent Vow within 8 seconds of arrival and then quietly done nothing, because the targeting computers had apparently run the numbers and reached a reasonable conclusion. Darren took the second hand his old hauler, still docked in the Ardent Vow's interior bay like a bicycle in a warehouse, into Verith Station and walked to the inquiry hall alone. The panel room held 20 officials, coalition admirals, legal representatives, species delegates. They sat in a curved arrangement above a single floor-level platform where Darren was expected to stand. The architecture was designed to make the person on the platform feel small. Darren had noticed that kind of design before. He stood on the platform and looked up at them without adjusting his posture. Admiral Grand Tull sat at the center of the panel. He was old for a Vihari, dark-scaled with heavy brow ridges, and he had the practiced expression of a man who had spent decades ensuring that his disappointment in others was clearly visible. He looked at Darren the way people look at something they found in their shoe. Darren Cole, Tull said, formerly of Coalition Pilot Candidate Program, Cycle 11. Dishonorably discharged. Currently operating without registration, without a flight permit, and in command of an unidentified and unregistered weapons platform that you have no legal right to operate. Good to meet you too, Darren said. The room went very quiet. Tull's expression didn't change, but something tightened behind his eyes. You will show appropriate respect to this panel, or you will be removed. Removed by who? Darren asked, not aggressively, genuinely curious. Nobody answered that. Tull leaned forward. The vessel you are currently operating poses a direct threat to Coalition security. It is unregistered. Its capabilities are unknown. You have used it to engage Veil forces without authorization from any Coalition command authority. You will surrender the vessel for inspection and impoundment until this panel can determine the appropriate course of action. From the small earpiece Darren wore, Arden's voice came quietly. Darren had explained the hearing before coming in, and Arden had asked to listen in. May I? Arden said through the earpiece. Darren touched the side of his jaw, which they had agreed would mean yes. He spoke aloud, but the words came from Arden, delivered through Darren's voice as he read them from the earpiece one sentence at a time. The Ardent Vow was constructed by the Orenai civilization approximately 4,200 years ago. The Orenai predate the founding of the Vihari Coalition by over 3,000 years. The Ardent Vow has never been registered under Coalition jurisdiction because it existed before Coalition jurisdiction existed. Any legal claim the Coalition has over this vessel is equivalent to a claim a child makes over a river because the child was born near it. The room was very, very quiet now. Tull's voice went flat. This vessel will be impounded. Arden again, through Darren. The Coalition is welcome to attempt that. To do so, it would first need to build a ship capable of making that attempt. By my estimates, that is 60 years away, possibly more. You are currently working in the wrong direction. Tull stood up. You are one man, one unqualified, discharged, insubordinate human with no rank, no authority, and no standing before this panel. Why would a vessel of that capability choose you? The room waited. Darren stopped relaying Arden's words. He answered in his own voice, quiet and without heat. Because when I was told that 2 people were acceptable losses, I went back for them anyway. Because every system I've ever been part of was very good at calculating what it was worth giving up. I was never good at that. He looked at Tull directly. You want to know why the ship chose me? Because someone built it for someone who couldn't be trained to leave people behind. That's the whole answer. There isn't a longer one. Tull sat down slowly. The hearing did not end with a resolution. It ended with the panel requesting a recess that lasted 3 hours, during which Darren sat in a waiting room and ate a nutrition bar from his jacket pocket. She found him there. Ressa Olm was Vihari, but the kind of Vihari who looked like she had spent most of her career somewhere other than command stations. Her uniform was clean but worn at the cuffs. She had a medic's patch on her shoulder and the direct look of someone who didn't have time for anything other than the point. I've spent 6 years on border worlds, she said, sitting across from him without asking. I've filed 32 formal requests for better response protocols for colony distress signals. I've been told 32 times that the allocation doesn't support it. She paused. You responded in 4 minutes. The ship is fast, Darren said. I want to join your crew. He looked at her for a moment. You don't know anything about me. I know you went back for 900 people when the response fleet was 6 hours away, she said. That tells me enough. Darren finished his nutrition bar and folded the wrapper carefully. I should warn you, he said. The galley situation aboard the Ardent Vow is not great. Ressa nodded as if this was a completely acceptable condition of employment. When do we leave? She asked. They came back with 40 ships. Arden detected the Veil fleet 11 hours before it crossed the border, which gave Darren enough time to make a cup of the bad coffee, sit with Ressa in the command room, and look at the tactical display for a long while without speaking. The Veil formation was organized, disciplined. 3 large vessels at the Center City-class destroyers, Arden called them, each one capable of cracking a planetary crust if given enough time. 37 support ships in a layered formation around them. They were not rushing. They were walking. The way something walks when it knows it is bigger than anything in its way. Their message to the Coalition was delivered on an open channel that every station in the sector could receive. The translation was plain. Hand over the unregistered vessel and its crew, or the Veil would consider the entire Coalition border region a contested zone and act accordingly. Total war, Ressa said quietly. They're threatening total war over us. Over the ship, Darren said. They've never seen anything that could hurt them like that, Arden said from the room's speakers. The engagement at the colony scared them badly. They are doing what frightened things do. They are making themselves look larger. Darren nodded slowly. He had already been thinking about what frightened things do. He'd had experience with it. Institutions did it too, not just alien fleets. He found out about the Coalition's response 3 hours later, not from any official message, but because Arden was monitoring every encrypted channel in the sector, and the encryption the Coalition used was, in Arden's words, charmingly optimistic. The Coalition was in emergency session. The Border World delegates were demanding military resistance. The Core World delegates were doing arithmetic. One unregistered vessel, however powerful, against the full weight of a Veil campaign that could last decades. The arithmetic kept coming out the same way. They were going to offer Darren to the Veil. Not officially, not on record. They were going to signal a willingness to facilitate a resolution if the Veil agreed to a full withdrawal. The signal had already been drafted. It was sitting in an outbox waiting for a senior admiral's authorization code. Tull's code. Arden told Darren all of this in the same calm voice it used to report weather patterns and navigation data, and Darren sat with it for about 30 seconds before he said anything. They didn't even call to tell us, Ressa said. Her voice was not surprised. It was the particular kind of flat that comes from having your lowest expectation confirmed. No, Darren said. What do we do? Darren looked at the tactical display. 40 ships sitting at the border. A Coalition station behind him with an outbox that was about to ruin several people's lives. Arden, he said, what do you know about the last time the Veil fought the Urinai? A great deal, Arden said. The conflict lasted 19 years. The Veil initiated it, as they have initiated most of their conflicts. They believed the Urinai were weak because the Urinai had not expanded aggressively. This belief was incorrect. A pause. The Veil lost approximately 81% of their total fleet capacity. Several of their core worlds were rendered uninhabitable as a consequence of the conflict they started. It was the most complete defeat in their recorded history. Do they remember it? They remember parts of it. Their leadership at the time suppressed the full record because the scale of the loss was incompatible with the Veil's understanding of themselves as an unconquerable force. Over 4,000 years, the truth became mythology. The mythology became vague. Now most Veil commanders know only that there was a conflict with the Urinai, and that the Urinai are gone. A pause. They believe they won. Darren stood up. Take us to the Veil fleet. Ressa looked at him. Alone. We're not going to fight them, he said. Give me a channel to their command ship. Wide signal, all frequencies they use. I want every one of those 40 ships to receive it simultaneously. It took Arden 6 minutes to reach the fleet. The fold dropped them into space 2,000 kilometers off the lead destroyer, which was close enough that Veil targeting systems locked onto the Ardent Vow before the fold had fully closed. Darren could see the lock indicators on the display, dozens of them. Every ship in the fleet painting them at once. He opened the channel. My name is Darren Cole. I command this vessel. 3 weeks ago, I disabled 7 of your ships above a colony you intended to take. I did not destroy them because I didn't need to. He paused, letting that sit. You came back with 40 ships. I want you to understand something before this goes any further. He nodded to Arden. What followed was not a weapon. It was a data broadcast. Arden's complete archive of the Orenai Vale conflict, compressed into a signal package and transmitted to every Vale ship simultaneously. Battle records, fleet loss tallies, the names of Vale worlds that no longer existed. Detailed, precise, in the Vale's own historical record formats, pulled from Arden's memory of captured documents from 4,000 years ago. 19 years of a war the Vale had convinced themselves they had won. You didn't win, Darren said. You survived. There is a difference. The civilization that built this ship is gone, and you still lost. He looked at the 40 ships on his screen. I am one ship. Think about what one ship just showed you. Then think about what you're planning to do with 40 against an unknown number of vessels like mine, and ask yourself whether you actually want to find out. He closed the channel. The Vale fleet did not move for 6 hours. Darren ate another nutrition bar. Ressa monitored the fleet's internal communications, which Arden was translating in real time. Debates. Arguments. The City-class destroyers broadcasting back to Vale Central Command. Whatever answers came back, they were not the answers the fleet commanders wanted. At the 6-hour mark, the Vale fleet turned and crossed back over the border. All 40 ships. Steady, organized, the same disciplined formation going out that they had used coming in. Nobody fired anything. Nobody sent a final message. They just left. Ressa let out a slow breath. Darren set his empty wrapper on the console and looked at the now empty border on the tactical display. Arden, he said, did the Coalition send that signal? The one Till drafted. The authorization code was entered 40 minutes ago, Arden said. The signal was transmitted. So they tried to hand us over. Yes. And the Vale left anyway. Yes. Darren thought about that for a moment. The Coalition had tried to trade him away to stop a war. The war had stopped anyway, without him being traded, because he had gone out and stopped it himself, which meant the Coalition's choice to sell him out had bought them nothing. But they had still made it. Make sure the sensor logs from the last 6 hours are clean and complete, he said. Everything. The fleet. The timeline. The Coalition's outgoing signal. Shall I transmit them anywhere specific? Arden asked. Darren looked at Ressa. She looked back at him. Everywhere, he said. The sensor logs hit every public channel in the sector within an hour. By morning, by the station time morning that people on Vareth and the border worlds woke up to, the story had already spread past anything the Coalition's communications bureau could manage. The logs were clean. The timeline was clear. The Coalition had drafted and transmitted a signal offering to hand Darren Cole to the Vale, while the Ardent Vow was sitting 300 kilometers from their own station. The Vale had left anyway. The coalition of border world delegates filed a formal motion of no confidence in Admiral Toll before the end of the day. 3 other admirals who had co-signed the signal authorization quietly requested reassignment before the week was out. Toll himself released a statement describing the signal as a diplomatic contingency measure, and then stopped releasing statements entirely when it became clear that nobody was accepting that description. He was removed from command 11 days later. Arden noted the development to Darren the same way it noted fuel consumption figures. What followed was 2 weeks of political noise that Darren mostly watched from a distance. The Ardent Vow was parked in the outer zone again, dark and quiet, while the coalition argued with itself. Border world voices got louder. Core worlds got defensive. Several species who had never spoken much about humans at all began revising their public positions, which was strange and uncomfortable to read, but not entirely unwelcome. Lev called 8 times. Darren answered twice. The formal offer came on a Tuesday, transmitted from the new acting commander of Coalition Border Operations, a Vihari named Admiral SOV, who had spent most of her career on the border and had a reputation for saying exactly what she meant. The offer was straightforward. Coalition rank for Darren Commander, officially, with all the legal standing that came with it. Full legal recognition for the Ardent Vow as a registered Allied vessel. A coalition commission that would give him authority to operate within their space and resources to support his crew. In exchange, the Ardent Vow would respond to crises within coalition space. Darren would report engagements to coalition command after they occurred. He read the offer 3 times. Then he wrote a counter. He did not want rank. He wanted the title to be informal, and he wanted it understood that the ardent vow answered to no chain of command. He would report engagements after they occurred, not seek approval before. His crew would be his own business. The ship would operate independently, allied but not subordinate. In exchange, when something came that the coalition genuinely could not handle, they could call. He would decide whether to respond. He expected they would call a lot. SOV's response came back in 4 hours. 2 words. Agreed. Done. Darren sat with the confirmation on his screen for a while. He thought about the training exercise 3 years ago. The 2 crew members who weren't real but should have been. The evaluator's face when he broke formation and went back for them. The formal document that said he couldn't be trusted. He thought about the chair he was sitting in, the one that had waited 4,000 years. Ressa appeared in the doorway of the command room with 2 cups of something hot. She had been working on the galley situation and had recently achieved a breakthrough involving a resequencing of the Oreni food synthesis protocols that produced something close to actual tea. Close. Not quite. She handed him a cup and sat at the operations console. Through the forward screen, the dead zone spread out around them, the same stretch of nothing where the second hand had first picked up the derelict on a sensor sweep. The place where the ardent vow had been waiting. Lev's voice crackled over the comm from the secondary console, where he had been installed as logistics coordinator for 2 weeks now. His qualifications for the role were approximately 0, and he had talked his way aboard with the specific argument that someone needed to manage Darren's finances because Darren's finances were, in his words, a cry for help. Darren had not been able to argue with that. The coalition confirmation is in, Lev said, reading off his console. We're official. Sort of. In an unofficial way. Whatever you want to call it. Independent Allied vessel, Darren said. Right. That. Very impressive title. A pause. So what do we do now? Arden answered before Darren did. There are 14 active distress signals within range of our current position. 3 are coalition border incidents. 2 are non-coalition emergency beacons from unregistered settlements. The remaining 9 are from regions that no current authority is claimed, which means no current authority is responding. The room was quiet for a moment. 9 signals with no response, Ressa said. Correct. She looked at Darren over her tea. He looked back. Then he looked at the screen, the stars, the dark between them, the uncharted space that went on far past the edge of what the Ardent Vow sensors could reach, which was farther than any coalition ship had ever seen. Arden spoke. Its voice was the same as always, calm, even for 1,000 years old and patient. But Darren had been listening to it for weeks now, and he had started to hear the things underneath the words. Arden had been alone for a very long time. It had waited for someone to show up and be worth waiting for. And now it was doing what it had been made to do, with someone it had chosen for reasons it had explained clearly and without flattery. This was what satisfaction sounded like, in a machine that had existed since before the coalition was born. You are aware, Commander, Arden said, that by any reasonable measure, you currently command the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. Darren looked at the stars for a long moment. Yeah, he said. Try not to let it go to your head. A pause. I have existed for 4,211 years. I do not have a head. Silence. That was humor, Arden added. I know, Darren said. You're getting better at it. He set his cup down, pulled up the 9 unanswered distress signals on the main screen, looked at the coordinates one by one. Arden, he said, which one is furthest out? Signal 7. Unregistered settlement, outer rim. 43 light minutes beyond the last coalition beacon. Take us there. The Ardent Vow turned in the dark. The engines rose in that deep hum that wasn't heard so much as felt through the seat, through the floor, through the air itself. The stars on the screen shifted as the ship found its heading. For 1,000 years old and still steady. Still fast. Still ready. The dead zone fell away behind them, and the Ardent Vow moved out into the parts of the galaxy where no one else was going, toward people who had run out of anyone to call. Darren Cole sat in the commander's seat and watched them come.